Welcome to Everyday Linux User. In today's video we're going to be talking about file permissions within Linux and how they work. So you can see here I've got a file and it's called my file, and you can see at the end here you've got all these little characters, and that's what I'm going to be explaining today, is these 10 little characters here. So I've put them all in little grid boxes so that it makes it easier to see, and you can see you've got this one at the end which is a dash, then you've got 420, 400 and 400, and I'm going to explain what that means as we go along. And to prove that is the case, let's go to our terminal window and we'll do it as we go along. And as you can see, there's my file, and it's read, write, R and R. Okay, so exactly what we've got here. So if we go to the second slide, let's look at this first two boxes here. So these two boxes here, and this is a special indicator, and it's usually to note something special about the file. So typically if we look here, look, you can see the dot file and the dot files have got a D in front of them. So what the D stands for is directory. If it doesn't have the D in front of it, and it's just a dash, it usually means it's just a normal file. The next three boxes, so RW dash, you can see I've put numbers in, and I'll explain the significance of the numbers later. But these are the permissions for the owner. So these, for this file, the owner, which is Gary, denoted by Gary there, has a number against the read, has write permissions, but doesn't have execute permissions because you've got a dash there. So you've got read, write, but can't execute. So it's not an executable file, it's just read and write. Okay, so if I nano into my file, because I'm the Gary user, I can type and I can save. You can change the permissions using chmod and by adding the permission. So for instance, if I just want to amend the user permissions, which are these three things here, so on my file it's these things here, if I type chmod u plus x and then the name of the file, then do ls-al, you will see that my file now has rwx here, which means I've now got read, write and execute permissions against my file. And you can see it's changed colour, which means really I've made it an executable. So if you've got a bash script of some sort of script, that would make that work. And my file, as you saw, didn't do anything, so but we can change that. And you see that's now a script that runs. If I take off the execute permission, you'll see my file is no longer executable, and when I run this, it doesn't do it. So what are the next three permissions? The next three permissions, so the next three numbers along, so we got the r dash dash, they're group permissions. So anyone in the same group that's listed here is able to have read access to that file. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to add a group, and we're going to say sudo group add accounts. So we've now got a group called accounts, and we can change the group of my file to accounts. So if I do ls-al now, you can see the owner is Gary and the accounts is the group. Okay, so anyone in the accounts group now has read access. You can change the permissions of the groups as you could with the owner. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to chmod g plus w my file, and you can see my file now has read write access for both me as Gary and the accounts group. So what we need to do now is we need to test this out. So I'm going to add a user, so we're going to type sudo user add, and we're going to call it test. Okay, so we've got a user called test. And we're going to give it a password. Don't worry about the bad password thing, it is actually changed. So I've done a cd into my home Gary demo folder, and if I do ls-al, you'll see that I've got my file in there, and I've got read-write access as a count, but everyone else has only got read access, and Gary has read-write access. So I'm in as test. So if I nano into my file, I can indeed read it. But if I try and add some more text, like I do Control O, you can see it says permission denied, because I do not have write access to that file. Now, if I want to add my test account to that group, I can type, obviously I have to exit as test because he doesn't have sudo permissions, but if I do sudo usermod and say g and then accounts and test, that's given the test the group permissions for accounts, so he's now in the accounts group. So I can now do switch user to test, clear the screen. You'll now see that if I nano into my file and do echo show this and do Control O, it wrote the 3 lines, and now I can Control X. So any user in the accounts group has read-write permissions as well. So that leaves us on to the last set of letters, the last grouping, and that is the permissions for everyone else. So you saw previously that everyone else only had read permissions and not read-write permissions, and we can change that. We can give everyone else write permissions. We can do chmod o plus w my file, and you can see everyone's now got read-write access, whether they're the owner, Gary, the accounts, or everyone else. So let's talk about these numbers at the bottom and what they actually mean. So thus far we've been given people permissions based on letters. So if I wanted to give my owner read permissions, I'd do chmod plus r, u plus r, or g plus r for group, or o plus r for everyone else. But I don't need to do that. If I want to give everyone read permissions, what I can do is type chmod plus r and then my file. Or I can do chmod plus w my file. If I wanted just the group and the owner to have write permissions, I can do G and O plus W my file. So you can do any combination of U, G and O, or none at all, and you can do any combination of RWX. So if I wanted, I could do CHW GO plus WX my file. And you can see that's given execute to the group and everyone else. So the only people that don't have permissions to execute is the owner in this case. If I wanted to, I could do plus RWX, and that means everyone's now got read, write, execute on that file. So equally, if I wanted to remove permissions from a file, I could sort of say chmod o minus w and then my file, and that takes away the permissions for the owner to write to the file. But what does it mean by these numbers? Well, you don't have to use this plus a minus logic. Essentially, you can use 3 digits to change the permissions of a file. So each one of these little boxes has a number. So read always has the number 4 associated, write always has the number 2, and X has the value of 1. So if I wanted to give a file read and execute permissions but not write, I add 4 to 1 to make 5. If I want to give it read, write and execute, I add the 2 and the 1 to make 3. So that would give me the first number up here. On the group, again, if I just wanted read permissions, I'd just say 4. But if I wanted read and write, it'd be 4 plus 2. If I want read, write, execute, it'd be 4, 2, 1. So any combinations of those 3 numbers added together will determine the permissions for the group, and that's that number in the middle. And finally, the same logic applies for everyone else. Any combinations of these 3 numbers added together will give you the permissions for everyone else. So if you add 4 and 1 together, everyone else will have read and execute permissions. So let's see that in action. So if we clear the screen, I'm going to do a cardinal sin and I'm going to do chmod 777 my file. If I do ls-al, you'll see read, write, execute, read, write, execute, read, write, execute on everything. Now the chances are, if you've got a script, you want everyone to be able to execute it but not necessarily read and write to it. So what we're going to do is change the permission for everyone to just be 1. So what we can do is chmod 771 my file. You can see the owner now only has execute permissions. With the group, you might want it that they can execute it and they can read it, but you don't want them to amend the script. So in this case, we'll add the 4 and the 1 to the group to give them, so it'd be 751 now. So owner gets all permissions, group only has read and execute, and everyone else has execute only. So if we do chmod 751 my file, you can see that the owner Gary has full permissions. The test user I created earlier would have read and execute, but everyone else would only have execute permissions. So let's put that to the test. We're going to switch users to our test user, and we'll do we'll do cd home Gary demo, and you can see we've got read and execute permissions. So let's try and edit my file. I'm going to add a new line, and you can see it's got permission denied. So if I cancel out of that and clear in ls, if I run my file, you can see it works perfectly well, and you can see that I can read my file because I can open it up in the nano editor. So that's how you change permissions of a file. And that is the end of the video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you next time on Everyday Linux User.